They gave me a job when I had nothing. And when they became my only family, they asked me to join their marriage. They gave me a job when no one else would. They bought me food when I couldn't afford to eat properly. They stayed with me when my mother died, and I stopped functioning like a normal human being. They became my entire world. And then, one night, they sat me down on their couch, looked me in the eyes, and asked me to join their marriage. I still don't know if I was more shocked or more guilty, because the worst part is, I think they believed I already had. 9 months ago, I moved to the city completely alone. No friends, no family, no familiar streets, no memories attached to anything, just a small apartment with thin walls and the quiet, constant hum of other people living lives I wasn't part of. I've never been good at being alone. Some people treat loneliness like a peaceful silence. For me, it feels like being erased slowly, like you exist, but only technically. I signed up for a voluntary cooking class mostly because I couldn't stand the silence in my apartment anymore. I didn't care about cooking. I just needed somewhere to exist where other people could see me. That's where I met her. She was warm in a way that immediately disarmed you. Not fake, warm, not polite, warm, but genuinely open, like she had already decided you were safe before you even spoke. We got paired together by accident. She smiled at me and said, "I'm terrible at this, so you're going to have to carry us." I remember laughing, not because it was funny, but because it had been so long since someone had spoken to me like I mattered. We talked the entire class about nothing important. Movies, music, food we liked, places we wanted to travel but probably never would. She didn't seem uncomfortable around me. She didn't seem bored. She didn't seem like she was waiting to leave. When the class ended, she didn't rush out like everyone else. She stayed, and she asked if I wanted to get coffee sometime. I said yes immediately, probably too quickly. 2 weeks later, she introduced me to her husband, Jay. I was nervous. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if he'd resent me or see me as some kind of intrusion into their life. But he didn't. He was calm, friendly, easy to talk to in a way that made everything feel simple. There was no tension between them. No awkwardness. No signs of jealousy or discomfort. If anything, he seemed genuinely happy that I had made a new friend, that I existed. We started spending time together regularly after that. At first, it was small things, coffee, dinner, walking through the city. Then it became normal, expected, routine. They became the people I spent most of my time with. They were the only people I spent most of my time with. I didn't realize it was happening at first. How deeply they were becoming part of my life. How deeply I was becoming part of theirs. The first time I went to their house, I remember feeling like I didn't belong there. Not because they made me feel unwelcome, but because everything was too nice. The furniture, the lighting, the quiet comfort of a place that wasn't temporary. It wasn't just a place to live. It was a place to stay. I remember apologizing for sitting on their couch, like I might damage it somehow just by existing on it. They laughed. Jay handed me a drink, told me to relax. They treated me like I belonged there. Eventually, I stopped apologizing. Eventually, I stopped feeling like a guest. Eventually, I stopped feeling like I was visiting. It started to feel like a second home. Sometimes I stayed late enough that they insisted I sleep over. At first, I resisted. It felt like too much, too generous, too kind. But they never made it feel like I was imposing. They made it feel like they wanted me, like my presence wasn't tolerated. It was desired. Then my mother died. It happened suddenly. One day she existed, the next day she didn't. I stopped functioning. I stopped answering calls. I stopped eating properly. I stopped being a person most people didn't notice, but they did. They came over without asking. They sat with me in silence when I couldn't speak. They brought food when I couldn't care enough to feed myself. They stayed. They didn't try to fix me. They didn't tell me to move on. They just stayed. And somehow, that was enough to keep me from disappearing completely. From that point on, they weren't just my friends, they were my only support system, my only constant, my only safe place, and I didn't realize it then. But that was the moment everything changed. Because from that moment on, I wasn't just part of their lives anymore. I was dependent on them, and dependency changes everything. If you've ever owed someone your entire stability, you'll understand this part, because gratitude is a beautiful feeling, until it starts feeling like debt. A few months after my mom died, I lost my job. It wasn't dramatic. No big argument. No explosion, just a quiet meeting, polite voices, corporate sympathy. We're restructuring. It's not personal. Your role is being eliminated. I remember nodding like I understood. Like I was mature about it. Then I went home and sat on my kitchen floor for almost an hour, staring at nothing. I didn't even cry. I just felt hollow. I had barely stabilized after my mom, and suddenly, the ground was gone again. I didn't tell R&J immediately. I didn't want to. They had already done so much for me. They had already seen me at my lowest. I didn't want to become a project. But R noticed. She always noticed. You're quieter than usual, she said one evening at dinner. Jay looked up too. I had to brush it off. I failed. The words came out before I could stop them. I lost my job. There was silence for a few seconds. Not judgmental silence. Thinking. Silence. Jay leaned back. What kind of role was it again? I told him. He asked a few more questions. Then, he said something I didn't expect. I might be able to help. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I assumed he meant advice. He didn't mean advice. 2 days later, he told me he had spoken to his boss. Apparently, they weren't hiring. Apparently, there wasn't even an open position. But somehow, there was now, for me. I remember staring at him when he told me, "You didn't have to do that," I said. He shrugged. It wasn't a big deal. But it was. It was everything. I was underqualified. I knew that. He knew that. And still, he convinced someone to create space for me. I got the job. My income, my stability, my ability to stay in this city. All because of him. That's when gratitude stopped being simple. That's when it became heavy. After that, I felt different around them. Not because they treated me differently, but because I did. Every dinner they paid for felt larger. Every gift felt louder. Every time they insisted on covering something, I felt smaller. I tried offering to pay more. They wouldn't let me. I tried insisting. They'd laugh. "You can get the next one," R would say, but there was never a next one. They never allowed it. At first, I told myself they were just generous, and they were, but generosity, when repeated enough, starts creating imbalance, and imbalance creates power, even if no one says it out loud. There were small moments, little things, things that, at the time, felt harmless. Jay would joke sometimes, "Careful, we're basically funding your lifestyle." He'd smile when he said it. R would lightly hit his arm. "Don't say it like that." But he never fully took it back. Or sometimes, if I stayed over too late, he'd say, "At this point, you should just move in." Again, joking tone. But jokes repeat, and repetition plants seeds. I brushed it off. Because what was I supposed to do? Confront kindness? Question generosity? Accuse them of motives, when they had only ever supported me? That felt insane, ungrateful, wrong. And I've always been obsessed with doing the right thing. We started spending even more time together. Weekends, random weekdays, late night movies. Sometimes I'd fall asleep on their couch. Sometimes they'd both fall asleep next to me. There were moments when our hands would brush, or when one of them would sit closer than necessary, but I convinced myself I was imagining it. I've never been great at reading subtext. I overthink everything. So I told myself this was another overthinking spiral, nothing more. But then something shifted. It was subtle at first, R started complimenting me more, not just casually, specifically, "You look really good in that. I love how you think about things. You're different from most people." Jay would watch quietly sometimes. When she said things like that, not jealous, observing, and then he'd add something. "We've always liked that about you." We, not it, was always we. They operated like a unit, and somehow, I was slowly being absorbed into that unit. I didn't notice how much until one night when a coworker asked me what I was doing for the weekend, and I said, automatically, "We're going to this place outside the city." I didn't correct myself. Looking back now, I can see it clearly. The way my life had started orbiting theirs. The way my schedule adjusted to theirs. The way my emotional state depended on theirs. If they were busy and didn't reply, I felt anxious. If they invited me somewhere, I felt relief. If they canceled, I felt rejected. That's not friendship. That's attachment. And attachment, when mixed with dependency, becomes dangerous. The night everything changed. Didn't feel dramatic at first. It felt normal. Dinner, wine, music playing softly. I remember feeling calm, safe. Jay asked if we could talk after dinner. His tone wasn't serious, just intentional. I squeezed my knee lightly. I thought maybe something had happened. Maybe one of them was sick. Maybe they were moving. Maybe something bad. I wasn't prepared for what they actually said. Not even slightly, because when you owe someone your job, your stability, your sense of belonging, you don't expect the price to finally be spoken out loud. But it was, and the worst part, they said it like it had been obvious all along. I remember the exact moment the air changed. Dinner had just ended. The plates were still on the table. The last traces of heat rising from food none of us had really finished. The music was still playing softly in the background. Something slow and forgettable. Normal. Everything felt completely normal. Until Jay said, calmly, "Can we talk for a minute?" Not urgent. Not nervous. Just calm. Intentional was sitting next to me on the couch. Close enough that our legs were touching slightly. That wasn't unusual. It had happened before. But this time, she didn't move away. This time, either of them spoke immediately. And in that silence, something inside me started to feel wrong. Not dangerous, just inevitable, like standing at the edge of something you didn't fully understand yet. Jay sat across from me, leaning forward slightly, his hands clasped together. R reached over and gently placed her hand on my knee. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't aggressive. It was careful, deliberate, familiar. That made it worse, because it didn't feel like a new action. It felt like a continuation of something that had already been happening. She looked at me with the softness I had come to associate with safety, and then she said, "You know how much you mean to us, right?" Us, always us. I nodded automatically. Because it was true. They did mean a lot to me. They were everything. Jay spoke next. "This isn't silly." I felt my stomach tighten. He continued, "This has been building for a long time." My brain struggled to keep up. Building toward what? I looked between them, waiting for clarification, for context, for something that made sense. R squeezed my knee gently. "We didn't want to rush you." Rush me toward what? My mouth felt dry. I couldn't think of anything to say. So I stayed quiet, and they kept talking. Jay smiled slightly. "We thought you probably already knew." That's when the fear started. Not loud fear, panic, just a slow, creeping realization that I was missing something obvious, something they believed had already been understood. R spoke again. "We care about you deeply." Her voice was calm, gentle, like she was explaining something fragile, something precious. Jay added, "You're already part of our life." Part of our life. Not in our life. Part of it. There's a difference. And in that moment, I started to understand, but I didn't want to, because understanding meant everything was about to change. R's hand was still resting on my knee. She didn't move it, She didn't need to, she said quietly. We want you to be with us. My brain stalled. With us. Not with him. With us. Together. At the same time, Jay said it more clearly. We want you to join our relationship. The words landed gently, but they didn't feel gentle, they felt heavy, permanent, final. I didn't respond. I couldn't, because suddenly, every moment from the past 9 months started rearranging itself in my mind. Every dinner, every touch, every joke, every look, every time they said we instead of I, every time they insisted I stay, every time they gave without asking for anything back. It all felt different now. Fake. Not malicious, but intentional, directed. Leading here, Jay chuckled lightly, trying to ease the tension. I mean, at this point, you basically live here already. He said it like a joke, but no one laughed or looked at me carefully, watching, waiting, not pressuring, just expecting. That was the worst part. They weren't asking like it was uncertain. They were asking like it was the natural next step. Like it had always been heading here. I was already halfway there. And maybe I was. Maybe I had been. Without realizing it. Because I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel violated. I felt guilty. Like I had accidentally promised something without knowing it. Like my presence in their life had meant more than I understood. Like I had taken everything they gave me, without realizing what they believed they were building toward. My voice finally worked. I don't know what to say. It came out smaller than I expected. R smiled softly. You don't have to decide right now, Jay nodded. We just wanted to be honest. Honest. That word stayed with me. Because it implied something else. That everything before this had been leading to honesty. Which meant everything before this had contained something unspoken, something assumed, something I had never consciously agreed to, but maybe unconsciously encouraged. My thoughts started turning against me. All the nights I stayed over, all the dinners I accepted, all the ways I had allowed myself to become part of their lives. Had I led them on? Had I made them believe I wanted this too? Had my dependency looked like consent? The silence stretched. No one moved. No one broke the moment, and I realized they were waiting for my answer. Not someday. Now. Even if they said they weren't. Because you don't say something like that and expect nothing to change. I couldn't breathe properly. Not from panic. From pressure. Not pressure they were actively applying. Pressure created by everything they had done for me. Everything I owed them. My stability. My sense of belonging. All of it connected to them. And now they were asking for some, demanding. Just asking, but asking was enough. Because saying no didn't just mean rejecting the offer. It meant risking losing everything. My friends, my support, my stability, my place in the world. I stood up suddenly. Too fast. Too abrupt. I need to think, I said. They didn't stop me. They didn't argue. They didn't guilt me. They just watched me, calm, understanding, certain. They already knew this wasn't the end of the conversation. They believed I would come back. I left their house that night feeling like gravity had changed. Like the rules of reality were different now. Because now I knew. Their kindness wasn't just kindness. It was connection. And connection always wants something in return. The only question was whether I was willing to give it. After that night, nothing changed. And somehow, that was worse than if everything had. They didn't message me asking for an answer. They didn't pressure me. They didn't bring it up again. They just waited, and their waiting filled every second of my life. The first night back in my apartment felt wrong. It had never felt like home, but now it felt like exile. I sat on my bed, staring at my phone, expecting a message. There wasn't one. Not from R, not from J, just silence. Not hostile silence. Not angry silence. Just absence. And absence can be louder than anything. I started replaying everything in my head. Every interaction from the past 9 months. Every moment that now looked different. Had they always seen me that way? Had every act of kindness carried meaning I didn't understand? Or worse, had I used them? The thought made me feel sick, because they had given me everything when I had nothing. And now, when they asked for something real, I couldn't give it back. Days passed. They didn't stop talking to me. But something had shifted. The tone was different, careful. Like we were all pretending nothing had happened. But everything had. Our group chat was still active, but now, it felt like I was watching them talk. Instead of being part of it, they'd send each other things, jokes, plans, photos. I'd reply sometimes. They'd acknowledge it politely, but the warmth was gone. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't dramatic, but I could feel it. Like standing outside a room where you used to belong, listening to laughter that no longer included you. At work, it was worse. Jay was still professional, still polite, still correct. But he wasn't the same. Before, he'd stop by my desk, ask how I was doing, invite me to lunch. Now he didn't. He didn't ignore me. He just treated me like everyone else. Normal, neutral, distant. And the worst part was, he was the reason I was there at all. Every time I sat at my desk, I was reminded, I didn't earn this place on my own. He gave it to me, and now had rejected him, rejected them. I started wondering if everyone knew, if he had told people, if they looked at me differently, if they knew I had refused something I didn't deserve to refuse. No one said anything, but silence is easy to misinterpret when you already feel guilty. I stopped sleeping properly. My brain wouldn't turn off. Every possible future played out endlessly. If I said yes, I could keep them, keep my stability, keep my place in their life. But I'd be lying, and lies rot you slowly from the inside. If I said no, I could lose everything. My friends, my emotional support, maybe even my job. My entire life here was connected to them. Without them, I wasn't sure what would be left. That was the truth I didn't want to face. I wasn't afraid of losing a relationship. I was afraid of losing my entire foundation. A week passed before I finally messaged them. I couldn't handle the uncertainty anymore. I needed clarity. I needed resolution. I typed the message slowly. I think we should talk. They replied almost immediately. Too quickly. Like they had been waiting. Of course, that hurt more than anger would have. Because it meant they still cared. Still hoped, still believed there was a chance I'd say yes. When I arrived at their house, everything looked the same couch, the same lighting, the same quiet comfort, but it didn't feel the same. It felt fragile now, temporary, like something that could disappear at any moment. R opened the door. She smiled, but it wasn't the same smile. It was careful, guarded. She hugged me, briefly. Before, she would have held on longer. Jay was sitting on the couch. He stood when he saw me. He looked nervous. I had never seen him nervous before. That made everything worse, because it meant this mattered to them, deeply. We sat down, the same positions as before, like we were recreating the moment that had broken everything. And no one spoke at first. They were waiting for me. Again. It was always me. The decision was always mine. And somehow, that responsibility felt unbearable. Because no matter what I said, something would end. I realized something in that moment. There was no version of this where things went back to how they were. Even if I said yes. It wouldn't be the same. Because now I knew everything had meaning, expectation, weight. And I couldn't pretend I didn't see it anymore. Cared about them, deeply. But not in the way they wanted. Not in the way they deserved. And pretending otherwise would only destroy everything slower. My voice felt fragile, but I forced the words out. I can't. The silence that followed felt endless. And I knew, in that moment, I had just lost the only people who ever made me feel like I belonged. I can't. The words didn't sound real when they left my mouth. They sounded small, fragile, but they were enough to destroy everything. For a few seconds, neither of them reacted. They didn't argue. They didn't try to change my mind. They just froze, like something inside them had quietly broken. R's hand slowly pulled away from where it had been resting near mine. Not dramatically, angrily, just gone. Jay leaned back slightly. His expression didn't show anger. That would have been easier. Anger would have meant I mattered enough to fight for. Instead, he looked closed, like a door that had quietly locked itself. R spoke first. Her voice was calm, too calm. Okay, just that. Okay. What? Were you sure? Just acceptance. And somehow, that hurt more than anything else. Because it felt like resignation. They had hoped for something else, but had already prepared for this outcome. I tried to explain, not because they asked, but because I needed them to understand. I care about you, I said. Both of you. You mean everything to me. My voice cracked slightly. But I can't be what you want me to be. They listened, quietly, respectfully, but their silence wasn't the same silence as before. Before, their silence had felt safe. Now, it felt distant, unreachable. Jay nodded once, slowly. Understand, but he didn't look like he did. He looked like someone accepting something he couldn't change, not something he agreed with, something he had to survive. I left shortly after that. N01 stopped me. N01 asked me to stay. N01 walked me to the door like they always used to. I walked out alone, and somehow, I already knew I wouldn't be coming back the same way again. The next day, the group chat was still there, but it wasn't alive anymore. I sent a message, something simple, something normal. No response. Hours passed. Then R replied, but not to me. She replied to something Jay had said earlier, like my message didn't exist, like I didn't exist. I told myself I was overthinking it, but it kept happening. Every message I sent felt like it disappeared into nothing. They weren't blocking me. They weren't being cruel. They were just continuing their life without me inside it. At work, the distance became real. Jay was still polite, still professional, but he never stopped by my desk anymore, never asked how I was doing, never invited me anywhere. I had gone from being someone important to being just another employee, just another person. And the worst part was, he had every right to do that. He didn't owe me friendship. He didn't owe me closeness. He had already given me more than anyone ever had, and I had refused the one thing he asked for. Even if it wasn't fair, even if it wasn't intentional, that was still the reality. I started noticing how alone I really was, not theoretically alone, actually alone. No messages waiting for me. No plans. No invitations. No one expecting me anywhere. I tried going to a pub by myself. I sat there for almost an hour, watching people laugh, watching people belong to each other. I didn't speak to anyone. No one spoke to me. I left quietly. I tried joining a running group. I showed up. I stood there. I listened to people talk to each other. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words never came. I left before it even started. I told myself I'd try again. I never did. My apartment felt smaller now, quieter, like it had accepted its role as the only place I existed. I started realizing how much of myself I had given to them, intentionally, unconsciously, but completely. They had become my routine, my emotional support, my sense of belonging, and without them, I didn't know who I was supposed to be. The worst part wasn't losing the relationship they offered. It was losing the relationship we already had, the friendship, the closeness, the safety. I missed them, not romantically, not physically, just as people. As my people, but they weren't mine anymore, and maybe they never were. Maybe I was just someone passing through their life, someone temporary, someone who had reached the end of their role. I still see them sometimes. At work. In passing, we nod, we say hello, we exist in the same world, but not in the same life. And every time I wonder if there was a version of this where I said yes, would I still have them? Would I still belong somewhere? Or would I have lost myself instead? I don't know. All I know is I did the right thing. I was honest. I didn't lie. I didn't pretend. I didn't use them. But honesty has a cost. And sometimes, the cost of being honest is losing the only place you ever felt at home.